Hey everyone, this is Caroline. Thanks for joining me today. We are broadcasting on several Facebook pages and the YouTube channel. So wherever you are, we do see your messages, we do see your comments. So make sure that you share what you have on your mind as you listen. I'm so excited about today's conversation. Of course, I'm assuming all of you already know my last film is called Superhuman, The Invisible Made Visible. It is about consciousness, the effect of consciousness on physical matter, on this physical reality. And of course, this has been the story of my life since I was a child. I know this is real. I know all of these experiences tell us that our consciousness is the one creating and affecting our reality. But what I wanted to do in the film is not just talk about it. I'm not the first one to talk about it, but to actually demonstrate in real time on camera how that could be possible. So of course, some of the experiments we did in the film have been done before, others not necessarily in this way, but I feel like this film shows the actual real time, how it's possible to think of something and have a direct effect. So of course, I'm looking for experts, I'm looking for scientists, I'm looking for inventors, I'm looking for great minds who can contribute to this topic. And I bumped into an amazing person. I mean, most of you probably know who he is, Adam Curry. I met him at Contact in the Desert like last year, and I was already in post-production, but I'm beating myself up still today that he couldn't be in the film, but hopefully the next one. So we had a great conversation, and more recently we got together. We had a very powerful, profound conversation about consciousness. Now, this guy, for those who don't know, it's like, I don't know how his mind works in such an incredible way. It's almost like he's always in this creative mode. You know, when you talk to him, you feel like he's always kind of creating as he's talking. That's the impression that I have anyway. And so he is been doing all kinds of inventions and designing experiments that measure the effects of consciousness on the physical world. So perfect match with what we are doing, what we're talking about. He also has a company, I think several companies, I mean, doing all this kind of work. So it is so exciting. Like, I love to meet people on the earth plane, you know, who get it, you know, who are at that level of intelligence, of creativity, and really bringing actual, not just validation, but also practical tools, because he creates apps, he creates all kinds of stuff to support everything we've been talking about. He's the director of Entangled Labs that conduct all kinds of, you know, again, research and things like that. So plus he's super charming. He's just eloquent. He's just like, I love this guy. Anyway, I'm going to bring him on, and I know I could feel already this is going to be a very powerful and profound conversation. So we would love to hear your comments and your questions as we are speaking, and hopefully we'll get to them at the end of this conversation. Okay, enough talking. Adam, I'm going to bring you on. Hey, how are you?
Doing well. I hope I can live up to your generous introduction. Thank you very much.
It is so true. I mean, honestly, like, you know, like, I walk around, you know, my whole life doing this type of work, and I'm always craving, you know, to meet people who are at that level of understanding of what we're talking about, you know. And it's not just like, ooh, I have this experience, you know, I just downloaded this thing and I'm connected to spirit. Okay, that's one thing, but I want, my whole life was about demonstrating the mechanics, like how does it work, and that is fascinating to me when I meet people like you who also have been so important in doing such important work to try to demonstrate the same thing, the mechanics of consciousness and the connection with spirituality, with who we are. So, but just in case, for those who don't know you, or I'd be surprised, but tell us a little bit about, how you got into this and where what you're up to now in the field of consciousness research.
Sure. Well, when I was a kid, I grew up in Colorado Springs, and my favorite thing to do was to take apart electronics and anything mechanical. And so my mom realized this and would bring me devices, radios, vacuum cleaners, whatever, so that I could take it apart and rebuild stuff. Nikola Tesla, for a period of time, had a laboratory in Colorado Springs, and sort of the remnants of his laboratory became a small museum in Colorado Springs. And so one day she took me there, and there was no one there. No one at that time really remembered who he was, except for one gentleman who ran the museum. And so this guy, showed me actual Tesla coils that he had built, and I was transfixed. One of my first passion, weirdly, was like Victorian era electric devices. And anyway, when I became older, I started to read his patents and books that people had written about some of his more exotic interests, which are in the realm of free energy, which are in the realm of the kinds of stuff that we're talking about today in the alternative research community. And so early on, I always kind of knew that there was more to the story, right? That the received scientific information or perspective was somehow incomplete. There's a lot more to uncover there if we only looked in an unconventional way at electric phenomena in this case. So that kind of interest in unconventional science led me ultimately, through a series of synchronicities, to a conference, which is how so many of us got turned on to these things. And the conference was called the Society for Scientific Exploration. It was this small group that was meeting in La Jolla in the year 2000. I was 15. So I ended up going, and I was the youngest person there by 40 years.
I love it. It's so cool.
And so much of it was over my head, but I understood enough to know, holy cow, these guys are onto something. The people at this conference, it was a little bit different than my Contact, for example, in the sense that it was much smaller. There's maybe 100 people. Almost all of them were professional, like tenured professors or professional scientists, but who were looking at a wide panoply of unconventional concepts, things like intentional healing, things like psychokinesis, right? Consciousness research, things like UFOs and unexplained aerial phenomena. And they were doing it not in a sensational way, but in a way that was applying the toolkit of rigorous thought and investigation to these anomalies because they matter, right? Because clearly if we could understand something about them, it's revolutionary. To say nothing of the fact that it made science interesting, like really interesting for me. And at that conference, a really wonderful woman came over and introduced herself, and this woman was Brenda Dunn. And Brenda Dunn was the laboratory manager of the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, which was the consciousness research group that was founded by the dean of the engineering school, Dean Emeritus at that time, Bob Jahn, who was also there. So Bob and Brenda kind of took me under their wing, and that was the beginning of a really deep friendship. I called them my fairy godparents, but it was really under the aegis of the Paralab and the SSE that I became aware and became involved in consciousness research and all things mad science.
Yeah, so fascinating. At the age of 14, 15, I mean, that's lucky, you know. So many people wait a long time to kind of get into that field, and something that I know it's their passion and their, I want to say, their life purpose. I feel that it is your life purpose, and that's probably why you're attracted exactly the people and the location and, you know, the synchronicities, as you say. But I want to start with the random number generator. So,
Mhm.
because I know you had a big part in creating a version of it that's being used right now, and many people know about these experiments being done. But I wanted to ask you because I was just on a shoot for a TV show, and basically these folks were you know, measuring all kinds of anomalies, you know, and so at one point they said, well, we have a random number generator, can you change the numbers just by looking at it, you know? And I said, sure, I could do that. But what they wanted to, because as you know, in the film you've seen, we've done many experiments demonstrating that that's possible and that works. And but then I was like, so what they wanted to do is actually, as I am trying to affect this device, they wanted to actually take all kinds of measurement, like to see if like the electromagnetic field was changing, and like, you know, the thermal, I don't know, all kinds of like other devices to see what was going on. And so I'm a little confused here, because, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about that, because for me, the random number generator is actually being affected by the intention of the person, which would have been me, obviously. But I want to understand the space between my intention and that device. You know, like I know I can affect it, I did affect it, but how did that happen? Is this electromagnetic? Is this some other plasma, you know, some quantum wave, you know, transferring from my physical brain? Is it my physical brain? You know, all of that stuff. So I'm dying to know uh, what you think the actual mechanism is. Not so much how the device works, you know, but that space in between. Make sense?
Oh yeah, I appreciate leading with the easy questions.
Yeah, I was gonna say the $1,000,000 question.
Yeah, I mean the search really is for the mechanism,
Yeah.
and while we still don't know the mechanism, in order to get a clear picture of what it could be or could not be, you have to set up an experiment in a very careful way to isolate certain things that it could be or could not be. And the random number generators experiments are really good for that. So I'll explain the setup.
Yeah.
A random number generator is, it measures something physical, typically a quantum process, something in the physical world.
Mm.
And it converts the outcome of that measurement into either ones or zeros.
Okay. But
So
what quantum, or like what is the nature, the quality of that quantum?
it need only have one property, and there's different quantum processes that you can convert into random streams, but it need only have one quality, and that's the quality of being intrinsically unpredictable. So most quantum phenomena can be set up in a way that the outcome of each event or each measurement is not dependent on the string of outcomes that came before it. So it is the future outcome is unknowable, intrinsically unknowable. And there's really robust evidence in quantum mechanics surrounding the fact that this is intrinsically unknowable. To say otherwise is this whole metaphysical question, but we know, at least from experiments, that the outcome of quantum events are random. And so one way to do that is through electron decay or radioactive decay. So you have an element it's a radioactive element, and it's shooting off all these particles, and the direction and timing of these particles being spun off in the decay is unpredictable due to laws of quantum mechanics. So if you have sensors around that radioactive element, they're picking up this decay in unpredictable ways and converting that into ones and zeros. For example, if the event is picked up over here, it's a 1. If it's picked up over here, it's a 0. That's how you do it. That was the early days of the random number generator experiments. Then it kind of moved into electron tunneling. So basically you take a diode, you turn it around in a way that it shouldn't go, and you apply a voltage to one end, and then you measure you basically measure the voltage potential on the other end. And essentially the electrons are encountering an electromagnetic barrier, and they either sort of bounce off of it or they teleport to the other side, meaning it's called tunneling, but they tunnel to the other side. It's a very well-known phenomenon, but it's a random phenomenon. And so you can basically convert bouncing off or tunneling through into zeros or ones, and you get this stream of output. Okay, so now why you want that is because the stream of ones and zeros is not going to be influenced by electromagnetic interference. If it's done right, if the equipment is set up properly, there's no electromagnetic interference because you're looking at quantum processes that are intrinsically random. And the ones and zeros end up being a balance, like a 50-50 balance, right? So if you were to read a whole bunch of these outputs, random, it's about 50% ones and 50% zeros. Okay, so then you can do this baseline before you introduce any psychic or PK component into it. You can do this baseline and collect a bunch of data and say, okay, I've got about a 50-50 distribution. It's certainly within the range of actually, good random. And there's all these tests, these die-hard statistical tests and standardized tests for randomness that you can apply to it and make sure that this is a real good random signal. Okay, so now you've done that, and you know that you've got a really unbiased output. Now you introduce the consciousness element. And classically, this involves bringing an operator, a person, into the laboratory, sitting them in front of the device, the random number generator, and giving them instructions to state your intention, meaning, do you want to make the machine produce more ones or make the machine produce more zeros? So they pre-state the intention, and then there's a little handheld thing where they start the device and it starts recording the outcome, and it records a set number, a significant number of bits. And then you can look at that and you can see, well, did it behave randomly or did it output ones or zeros in the direction of the person's intention? And you can do this experiment many times and get a really robust data set and look to find anomalies. And typically what happens is the output of the machine is biased in the direction of their intention, meaning if they decided to produce more ones, it tends to lead in that direction. More zeros, it tends to go in that direction. So not only does this make the statistics very simple, so if you're looking to sort of elucidate the PK effect, it makes it easy to do statistically, but it also shields from a lot of external influences. Electromagnetic stuff, for example. The equipment was shielded also in aluminum and mu metal and these types of things that restrict interference. And there's types of processing, XORing, you can do to eliminate bias. So that tells you not only that there is such a thing as PK in this experiment, but it also tells you what probably the mechanism is not. It does not seem to be an energetic effect, at least an energetic effect that we understand it. There's permutations of the experiment that can continue to tell you things about the mechanism. For example, you can increase the distance between the person and the machine and see if there's a decline in the strength or the ability of the effect. And it turns out there is not. In fact, it can be, hundreds or thousands of miles away. That's very unlike any force that we're used to thinking of, the traditional force.
Right.
All forces that we tend to think about fall off and they decrease in strength as a function of the square of the distance between the two. So you know that you're dealing with something that's not a traditional physical force in the sense that we're used to thinking of it. So whatever it is, whatever the mechanism is, it seems to be more like, if you will, an informational force.
Yes.
And think of an informational force as being very different than electromagnetic or something like that. It seems to be non-local. It seems to be instantaneous, and distance doesn't matter as much.
Wow. Okay. So, but because the device is picking up, decay or electrons or whatever it's picking up, what does that tell us about the nature and quality of consciousness itself? Does that mean when I put my intention out, I am producing this decay, or am I interacting with this? Like, do you see what I mean? Like, what does the fact that it's capturing this, it's not, for example, what you just said, it's not capturing my energy field being amped up because it's shielded from that, which many people think that's how things work. In some ways it does, but that's not the case, because when we do long distance stuff, it's not, So if it's not my energy field that's being amped up, it is my it's my intention. What is in my whatever I'm emitting in that signal, that is actually being captured. Another $1 million question.
Right. Well, we don't really know, but we've pushed a little bit further ahead in these questions, I think, in the last 10 or 20 years. Consciousness seems to affect random physical phenomena. Whenever there is uncertainty in the physical world, is an opportunity for consciousness to nudge those probabilities one way or the other. And we're seeing this in a very rarefied effect with the random number generators, which is pure uncertainty. And our conscious intent, which is pure consciousness intent, right? Coming together, and you can see it sort of nudge. There's a level of our minds that is deeper than our conscious intent, the things of which we're aware. We're basically just aware of our own mind most of the time. But in my opinion, the real level of action is a subconscious level. And that could mean that our consciousness, meaning if our conscious mind is just the tip of the iceberg above the ocean, then the rest of the iceberg below the water's surface is our subconscious mind. And that is influencing and nudging and working with the intrinsic probabilities of the physical world, of the physical matrix or reality in which we live. I'll give you a couple of examples. We did an experiment at the Pear Lab, which unfortunately was never published, but is really interesting. So there was a darkened room with no windows. And in the middle of this room, we took a growing light, a light that's used for providing the spectrum of UV that plants need to live. It replaces the sun, basically. And we connected that to a motor, and the motor could move the light in different directions, maybe over here, maybe over here. And the direction of the motor was controlled by a random number generator. And this was installed in the top of the ceiling. And then we took a house plant that needed a lot of light to survive, and we put it in one corner of the room. And then we recorded how often the light was shining in each quadrant of the room, right? And because it's intrinsically random, you would expect that the light would shine 25% of the time on average in this room. But of course, you see where this is going. It's shown on the plant far more often than on any other quadrant in the room. To me, that's a really perfect example of what consciousness does in the world. Consciousness, it's like influencing or nudging things in the world in our direction that we need for our survival, but also for our growth. Right? It sort of keeps everything together and stable in a way that is necessary for consciousness to exist in this plane. It's a bit metaphysical, but I think that's sort of what's going on. And that is captured in the plant experiment. So I think what you're seeing is just what consciousness does in the world. And we call it psi and pk, and we think of it as these abnormal or unconventional abilities, but it's probably just happening literally all the time. It's how consciousness sort of keeps the physical world together.
Yeah, so again, I think we're still, if I'm hearing you correctly, we're still identifying or measuring the effect of consciousness, and not so much what consciousness really is, what it's made of. And so, but I'm also kind of in agreement with you that it is information. Everything is information. And so I am basically emitting information that gets spontaneously somehow translated into, that has a physical component that is recognizable by that device, and then it makes it go to the 1 or to the 0. But to me, it's still like the nature of like, so what is it that I'm emitting? I'm emitting data, right? That is being understood and captured by the universe. But what is that data? It's almost like I feel, and also, I think I shared with you, and most people who are listening probably know a little bit of my background and my history, but I can see the subtle energy. So in other words, as you are thinking, I can see the thoughts. I mean, in a way. And so, of course, the question is, how do you know? Is it real? I've been doing this for a very, very, very long time. For me to get enough validation that what I'm seeing is not made up. I didn't just, project my own intention or whatever. What I'm seeing is most of the time very, very close to, like 99% of the time is what I'm picking up from that person. So, and every time I do this, I feel I am reading information. I am literally interpreting the information. Of course, so you're not telling me what your thought is, right? You're not telling me what your subconscious mind has in it. And yet I can read this data, retrieve this data spontaneously, and tell you that, this happened to you, when you were 7, or what you're struggling with is, comes from that. And so this is a process. So what you're saying validates kind of my process, how it works. So I know for a fact that everything is data. And we have this spontaneous ability to retrieve this data. Of course, nobody teaches us any of this stuff. So in school, it's like this whole rote learning thing, repeating and not, like really understanding what consciousness is. So, but basically what I'm saying is, as I am retrieving this information, and as I see how I'm retrieving it, like how I'm retrieving it spontaneously, but I see also like, as if your brain and your mind is like a quantum computer, and it's emitting quantum waves. It's like a wave, actually, that has a very unique property that's very different than other waves. So, for example, an electromagnetic wave, acoustic wave, all kinds of waves. It has a very unique property that seems to be coherent with the structure of space itself, so that when it comes out of your brain, it is coherent with the space between me and you, meaning it exists everywhere. And if my intention is to retrieve this information, I can. I mean, again, we're not, but anyway, that's kind of how I see it. So, and I experience it more importantly. And I feel like what you're saying brings some validation to that. And, the measurement, I think, kind of validates or complements what I'm saying. Does what I say like make sense to you?
No, it does. You know, I think once you either do enough of these experiments or acquaint yourself sufficiently with the thinking on it, you realize that looking in the objective world for the mechanism is a bit of a fruitless search right now.
Mm,
It it doesn't. Nothing really ends up pointing to the physical world. All of it ends up pointing back at yourself.
exactly. I love it. I love it. Yeah. So therefore, it goes back to you are the player. You are because that the thought that you emitted or whatever it is that you are doing is still a potential. It's a
Mhm.
potential out there in the universe, but I am choosing to retrieve that data and do something with it or not, or what have you, or if we are having a conversation. So yeah, I mean, I think that is to me the most important kind of, at the end of the day, what is the bottom line? The bottom line is that you are the one emitting this data. You are the one retrieving this data. You are the one that is really in charge of your experience.
You're the one assigning to it any kind of meaningfulness.
That too,
Mhm.
which is probably subject to your belief systems, your whatever social, all kinds of parameters that you've put on to yourself, actually, and that's how we see the world differently and we behave differently. So fascinating, so like incredible. To me, just like a quick thing that I don't know, I feel like it's not just the subconscious mind. I feel like we also have different layers of consciousness. So the subconscious mind is doing something. The conscious mind is obviously the one that's saying, I want to focus my intent and retrieve this information or do whatever. The subconscious mind, I feel like, is also emitting all kinds of other information that is subconscious to you. For example, like, can I do this? How does it work? What if I'm not good enough? I feel like all of these kind of, I want to call them lower vibration, are all stored in the subconscious mind. That's why you're not aware of what is there. So when you say, I want to create something and I want to retrieve this information, your subconscious mind is saying at the same time, no, I can't, and I'll be a failure or what have you. So that's why a lot of the time you end up not doing anything or getting anything. But to me, it's more these super conscious, kind of the layer of consciousness that's above, that is able to kind of understand all of this and tap into it, at that level and make sense, kind of have the bigger picture, the bigger story of, okay, how do I fit into, this structure of the universe and so on and so forth. And so, which makes things even more complex and more complicated when you're trying to figure out what consciousness is and the effects of it on the physical world. But anyway, somebody is asking, Adam, thank you so much. Would you please explain again your understanding how consciousness behaves, survival, growth, based on the plant in the dark room experiment?
Hmm.
So, I think what he's saying, like, how did the
Yep.
consciousness of the plant behave?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a metaphysical assumption here in the plant experiment, which is that consciousness is primary to the physical world, meaning that it's consciousness first and everything is consciousness. That's sort of the assumption that I'm making there. And that consciousness in a way animates or informs or influences or nudges the physical world around it in a way that keeps the physical body, I guess, or the physical life that it is animating, keeps it alive, keeps the things that it needs for survival and growth coming to it. So it's the same mechanism, which we don't know, that allows consciousness to influence the random number generator. I guess what I'm saying is that if you accept that as axiomatic, that there's some influence of consciousness on the physical world, then you can move up into higher order systems from the random number generator experiment into life living in the world, basically. And in the sense of the plant is, what could be happening is the plant is, the consciousness in the plant is influencing the random number generator to make the light shine on it so that it continues to survive and exist, right? But humans are doing the same thing. I think, and animals and all life are probably doing the same thing. There's a part in the movie where the water with DNA in it is shown to have even stronger effects due to consciousness. So if we're mostly water and DNA, then it could be that our consciousness is holding this bunch of cells together and influencing its operation in a way that keeps us together as us, so that consciousness can exist and sort of shine through into this realm of reality. But also it probably influences things to come our way that support our growth in other ways, not just our survival, but also, if you will, our spiritual growth. So this classically is synchronicity, right? Things that you need for your growth and development, whatever they may be, people or information or documentaries, it's almost like they come to you at the right time. And so there's a sense that it's some deeper or higher part of ourselves that's involved in sort of conspiring to bring these things together for our own growth. So that's kind of what I mean about the plant experiment.
Yeah, actually, this brings me to another question. Do you think, because I want to ask you about the experiments we did in the film, but do you think everything has a consciousness? So of course, plants, you've already talked about that. Animals, we know for sure. Humans, I hope so. But
most of us.
Yeah, most of us, right? But what about physical matter? I'm curious to hear your take on it, because I want to share with you what happened when we do experiments with a biological system, such as, or maybe like DNA or water or something like that, versus an electrical device, an electronic device, which is material, versus another type of material object. So I would love to hear your take on it. And then I want to share, in the movie, how this all kind of was like, what? Interesting. I'll share with you. But go ahead, tell me, does everything have a consciousness? Does my table have a consciousness?
Well, I think it does, but it's a question of a spectrum of consciousness. So is the table self-aware? You could never know that question, right? But it certainly doesn't seem to behave the way that plants, animals, and people and so forth behave. But I do think that all physical matter is some form of consciousness, but it's maybe not consciousness that we think of. It's a spectrum, right? So there's a gentleman named Christoph Koch, who was sort of the disciple of Francis Crick, who discovered the helical structure of DNA. And Crick spent most of his life trying to get rid of any sense of animism, meaning he was a dyed-in-the-wool materialist. This perspective that only things that are physical are real, and everything else that's not physically measurable and identified in our theories and measurable by our instruments is therefore not real. So consciousness, it's an illusion, it's an epiphenomenon. And he was trying to get rid of all this talk about consciousness. And so Christoph Koch was kind of brought up in that ilk, but had to ultimately admit that perspective is misguided. Kudos to him, because scientists don't like to admit that they're wrong. And he's done really wonderful work in this concept of proto-consciousness. So he's a panpsychist, meaning he believes that consciousness is everywhere in everything. So the sun would be conscious, your desk, and so forth. but there's something that has to do with the structure or the organization or the intricacies of the self-involvement of physical matter that allow for greater and greater consciousness, like self-awareness ultimately, to come through. And looking at physical matter, a rock, a table, without it's the stuff of consciousness. So it's proto-consciousness, but it is somewhere in a process of becoming sufficiently self-integrated, complex, evolved, and arranged in a way that would allow for this consciousness to come through. So I'm quite sympathetic to that perspective. The Vedas, sort of the ancient texts that from which modern yoga comes from, talked at length about these types of concepts. And that came from an era that seemed to be sufficiently more enlightened on these subjects than we are. So I'm perfectly capable of, I think that everything is conscious. And it's interesting that what I think is the future of psi research is not random number generator stuff so much. That's certainly been done, but it's the kinds of things that are featured in parts of your movie. Let's look at the influence of consciousness on water. Let's look at the influence of consciousness on plasma, both experiments that I've done that are significant, have effects that are much stronger than the effects in random number generators. And the effects on biological systems in an isolated way. I mean, I think that's really the future, and that would point to the idea that there's more influencing and interacting with things other than just quantum particles is probably the next phase, and probably will produce some much more interesting results.
Well, that's what I tried to do in the movie, obviously. And so I want to share with you how all this came about and what the experience is when consciousness interacts with the biological system versus something else. So first of all, I started, I've been doing energy medicine and consciousness expand, my whole life. But about 3 years ago, I started working with different scientists, and Glenn, for example, had been working with DNA and water, and another scientist had this lab with all kinds of devices. It was like, what did they call it? Something suit, but anyway, sensor suite. It was like, so one sensor picked up electromagnetic, electronic, electrical, thermal, acoustic. So it's like a bunch of different devices, and try to affect it, close by, at a distance. And so I started doing all these experiments, and we would have an effect, big effects. And then I was able to repeat it again and again. For those who are listening, you watched the movie. I mean, we were setting it up scientifically, the proper protocol. Like, we would create the baseline over a period of time for a while. Sometimes it's a day before, days before, sometimes the day of, and then certainly a few hours before, a few hours after. So we know what the baseline measurement is. And then exactly at 3 o'clock, I focus on it, and boom, we see the effect. 3:15, I stop focusing on it, it goes back. So that time correlation thing is what was validating that it is the effect. It was the effect of my consciousness doing it. So working with these different guys over 3 years, I realized, wait, this is crazy. I mean, this is repeatable. This is measurable. This is very, very real. And so that's the reason why, and I realized that nobody, of course, there's isolated, experiments here and there. You read about this report and that paper, but I had not seen something done in a movie format. So I said, I need to do this film, and I'm going to include all of the experiments that, I've done, that I know work, and things like that. So, but I wanted to share with you that, when I was working with DNA, it is such an interesting experience. It's almost like when I would focus on the DNA, it almost knew what I was going to tell it to do. It was more than spontaneous. It was instantaneous, and it felt like I just zapped it. It was this kind of effect, and the thing would just bounce. And we're talking, for those who are listening, the very first time I did this, we had a 400% increase in that split second, in those seconds. In this particular movie, on that day, it was 100%, which is still pretty significant. But just to say, the effect was so interesting. And so same with water is slightly different because it depends what you're doing. And again, going back to the level of uncertainty, that in water there's all kinds of stuff. There's the chemistry, there's the molecules, there's some particles that shouldn't be there. And so I had to kind of focus specifically on changing the pH up or down. And so it's a little bit more of, because then I would have to get rid of some of the particles and the temperature, control the temperature. So what I'm saying is the experience was slightly different, but still quite fast, I felt like it was just part of me. But then when it got to an electrical device, an electronic device, it felt like my intention was pushing. It's like it was making something happen, was interacting with this device and pushing it to do something. It wasn't organic. The DNA and the water was like me, like whatever I thought happened, which is pretty crazy. Which means that when we think, it happens, and we are made of water. So we are literally thinking and affecting our body in real time. And this happens over and over and over and over. So that's what happens with an electrical device, electronic device. But then when it came to moving a piece of paper or a pen or something, which is a physical object, the first time it was crazy. It was like, what did this just happen? It's as if the paper or the pen, whatever I was trying to move, had a level of consciousness. And I want to say, felt like ego. It felt like it was responding to me. It was saying, I would say like, okay, I want to move. Even if I was working with air molecules or temperature, I would increase the temperature with my mind, the temperature around the object or whatever. Even I was working with these forces, influencing these forces, but the piece of paper would say, well, I'm not ready to do that, or I don't want to do that, or I wanted it to turn in one direction, it wanted to turn in another direction. Which is so, isn't that like crazy? What do you think? From your perspective, what do you think happens like when consciousness interacts with different types of physicality?
Well, a number of possible things are going on. One is that we can't discount the role of feeling that this new experiment is somehow going to produce better results, and because of that, producing better results.
But I didn't know that though, going in.
But you knew it ultimately. So there's retrocausal effects too.
Oh my God. Okay.
Well, there's just one of the fun things about doing experiments in this is that, I've had the opportunity to interact with hundreds of people who use the random number generators that we built, and they would report on their experiments. And they would always set up these experiments. They'd do something, they'd get an effect, and then it would decline. And then they'd think, how can I get a stronger effect? And maybe they would do chanting or something beforehand, and they'd get a stronger effect, but then it would decline back to where it was. And then, okay, I'm going to meditate in this tradition. And then it would get a strong effect and it would decline. I'll meditate in that tradition and strong effect and decline. So you do this enough and you realize that it's just you, right? What you're doing is you're giving some part of your mind permission basically to get a stronger effect. Maybe because it's meaningful, the ceremony or the thing in which you're engaging is meaningful. And I think there's probably something about interacting with what you know is a living system, with water, or with DNA, or whatever, that is, it's a much more meaningful experiment. It makes you feel like the outcome is going to be stronger because, it's not random number generators anymore. Now it's like living systems. So that can't be discounted. However, I still think that there is something about water, there is something about DNA, there is something about plasma, there is something about dynamic systems, more complex systems, that really is more receptive to the influence of consciousness in a way that doesn't decline after the second or third time that you do it. I think maybe it's because these systems are more in touch with whatever it is that consciousness is, right? And if it's coming from the same place, or it's operant on the same field, if you will, then perhaps the aperture for the signal of influence is expanded and you're getting a stronger effect. I mean, this is why I think that the future of psi research is not the random number generator stuff. It's not the photon stuff that's been done. It's looking at influence of PK in bigger and more dynamic systems. Particularly, I think when we're trying in earnest to create something like AI, like real AI, and we're approaching it as a computer science problem. We're approaching it as, let's just build a sophisticated calculator that can run the routines. Sorry, but I think you're missing the point.
Right.
We need to be understanding the mysteries, the anomalies of dynamic systems, particularly of dynamic systems that seem to have some aliveness to it. And unless and until we do that, we ain't gonna be successful in the AGI, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. But, I like what you said. It's interesting because the very, very first time that I worked with DNA and I zapped it, I was surprised, wow, was it so easy? I actually thought I didn't do anything because it was just and I remember the scientists and the people who were kind of taking measurements, they were wait, did we do is this real? Did it really work? And so they had to kind of verify the results over and over. But then eventually I did it again and again. So we knew. But my point is, but you said that it's a retrocausal thing that I already knew coming in, that it is plasma, it is DNA, it is organic, and I probably could do it. So it's kind of funny. I like how we kind of know certain things, and at the same time, we allow ourselves to be surprised, to have that human, kind of experience. But our superconscious mind kind of already knew and probably guided us to that too. So going back to, so I so appreciate you kind of, saying that the experiments we did in the film are more relevant to where we are today and where we should be going. So tell me about how you liked the film. What what did you think? I mean, being in that field and seeing how we set up the experiments, how many experiments we set up, and tell me what you think.
I think it's a must watch for people who are familiar with the body of psi research, but also people who are not. You do a really fantastic job of kind of starting from the beginning of the canon of psi research, from remote viewing to PK, and then moving into, basically, I've said it before, but where I think all of this is going. It's an excellent summary. The fact that you have basically it's visual, so people can, rather than reading a research paper or getting it from a conversation, they can actually see the people doing these things. They can see the outcomes. It helps to visualize and understand what it is that you're talking about when you talk about experiments, right? But there's also, you've wrapped it all in story, as a good filmmaker should. So it comes highly recommended. I won't give away too much, but I really liked the Mindfold.
Oh, everybody loves it. And here's the guy. Yeah. So what happened? I appreciate you saying that. And by the way, for those who are listening who have not watched the film, come on. I mean, this is right. I mean, just go to superhumanfilm.com, rent it. It's just so, and it's also entertaining because you're watching all this stuff happening in real time. And so it's like you're saying, instead of reading a paper or something, it's a lot of fun. But also the reaction of the crew. So I would bring, as you saw in the film, somebody who had never done anything before, like they've never done telekinesis, never done anything. And so we were all watching. And don't forget, we have like 6 cameras going on, we have cable, we have lighting, we have audio equipment. It is not the easiest, kind of space to focus your consciousness and get it to do something, especially if you've never done it before. So those folks who were in the movie and were able to literally, move the paper or do this or that, the crew, as they were watching, they were like, oh my God, that it means that I can do this. I mean, if she did it, she had no preparation. So that was the reaction, which is what I want, because at the end of the day, this means that we can all do this. But then when I found this crazy thing, I cannot speak for everybody out there who does this. I can speak for the ones that I have investigated and studied, and the ones that I am actually facilitating myself. And so basically, you are training your mind, your brain, to be able to see completely blindfolded. And the way we were able to measure that in the film is we measured the amount of light inside. There's nothing, no light, and technically no light means no vision, and yet you are able to see. And so when I first saw this, I thought it was impossible, and that's the first reaction. But as you go through the training yourself, it is fascinating, because it's like you start to all of a sudden see little sparks of light, and you're like, wait, is my mask still on? Like, you think you're cheating, because the reaction is, this is impossible. And somehow the brain manages to be reprogrammed to a point for you to see completely blindfolded.
It reminds me of the Ganzfeld experiments of the 80s, which seems to be kind of forgotten in the literature, but produced some of the most significant experimental side effects. And that was just cutting a ping pong ball in half, basically, and putting that over the eyes so that you're reducing the visual inputs. And then, once you've put the participant in such a state, then their ability to I guess remote view or something like that is much improved.
Yeah, so many people, like, also I talked to Tom Campbell and other Dean Radin and all those guys. The first kind of reaction is, this is probably remote viewing. You're kind of, but and maybe some people do it that way. So I'm not sure. I can tell you of the way we do it, and it's not exactly remote viewing. It's almost like you're not really projecting your consciousness, which again, that could be done. But the way because you're literally like you're seeing through. In other words, this mask eventually becomes like a veil. It becomes less and less and less opaque, and and it's like you're looking through a window. That's how eventually it feels. So you're not really remote viewing. You're seeing. But again, there's different techniques regardless. When I investigated this and I saw that this was real, I thought, this is the ultimate validation that our consciousness can, first of all, is not bound to the body or to the brain, and can reprogram the brain to a point of literally creating another type of visual system, whatever you want to call it. Did you take that from it? Like, how was your experience watching that whole segment?
I think that there's more to what sight is than perhaps we've thought. Clearly, photons entering the pupils and hitting the rods and cones, that's part of it, but it may not be the whole story. There might be something like an sort of a psi component or an energetic component to the visual sense that we just assumed wasn't there. But if these people are able to do these things with that removed, then that warrants some serious study, because this is groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I want to do. So one of the groups is doing more scientific research on it. There's somebody else I know who is doing measuring the brain waves as you are doing that. Like, how do the brain waves change as you are trying to see through blindfold and stuff like that? But I would love, if you have some idea, because this is groundbreaking. This is like at a whole different level. So, any suggestions or ideas that come to you at some point, let me know, because I would love to investigate how we can research that also, for my next film, which I'm telling you officially right now. I hope you will be part of it. But we can talk about that. All right. Well, let's see if there are any other questions. So somebody's saying, to Caroline and Adam, your thoughts on, is it possible to influence another human being's consciousness? If I can influence an object, could I influence somebody else's consciousness?
Yeah, I suppose so. There's a body of work that was done called the Dream Telepathy Studies at Maimonides Dream Center in New York City by Stanley Krippner and I think Montague Ullman. I may be wrong on that, but Stan Krippner, who I'm sure you know, and a wonderful guy. And in this, he had participants, one who was asleep and another who was trying to show up in their dreams or influence their dreams, basically. And they were able to do that. So it could be that in the same, whatever it is that sort of connects consciousness to consciousness or consciousness to physical world can connect two people in a way that ends up sort of being something like one person influenced the other. So I think that's possible. Now, who knows to what extent like volition is involved there. Right. My remote viewing teacher, Lynn Buchanan, when he was a remote viewer in the military program, part of his job was as a remote influencer.
Yeah.
And he was tasked at trying to influence Soviet leaders to make certain decisions. So the military at least took it seriously enough. And he seems to think that it had some very interesting effects. So, people who had a lot invested in these programs seem to think that was possible.
Yeah. So people are asking about your last name, so I'm just going to fit it in here. This brings me this brings me to that question about when we were influencing, when we were doing PK. PK, for those who don't know, psychokinesis, it's the ability to affect a physical object without physical contact. So in the movie, of course, we did it close to the object and, with a container. But then eventually I did it long distance. Not only that, it was in a Faraday cage. And so we introduced the mechanical component, which you saw in the film, but nonetheless, that mechanical component didn't have that sort of effect. And so I was able to influence the object long distance several times. And so the idea is, like we were saying earlier, so if I can, the level of consciousness of a piece of paper is probably very small, or it's like a different level of consciousness, whereas a person, it's more organic, going back to the plasma and the DNA. So it kind of makes sense. It would make sense. It's logical to assume that if you can influence the piece of paper long distance, you can influence the consciousness of another person. Scary thought. But, right? I mean, the probability of that, I would say, is quite high. What do you think?
Probably pretty high. But it's probably not something to be concerned about. If you're concerned about being influenced, our subconscious conditioning is influencing us way more than other people's, potentially nefarious thoughts.
Yeah, I agree, because your subconscious mind is with you all the time. It's talking to you all the time. You grew up with it, you built it, it's like part of you. And yeah, definitely. I agree with you. Yeah, because sometimes people say, well, can you use this for, like negative intent and stuff? Yes, you can. But I think just like you can do that, you can also intend for nothing to interfere with you, And then again, we're influenced by pretty much everything right now, from normal information coming through news or whatever, books, but also our parents, our family, our background, our subconscious, stories. So we're a product of all these influences anyway, So anyway, very, very cool. Oh my God. I can talk to you like forever. So, but let's see if there are any other questions. Do you guys have any questions or comments for Adam? Does that mean that if a large group of people focusing on the same thing, such as a desired outcome for a global event, can be steered by their intent?
I have mixed feelings on this one. There's something in us that wants to believe that a whole bunch of people, all with the same coherent and focused intent, is going to have, let's say if there's 10,000 people, it's going to have 10,000 times the amount of strength or whatever as one person doing it. But this really isn't shown in the laboratory. Now, the laboratory can't show you everything, right?
Right.
There's some things that it just ain't good at showing you. And so, for example, you have a person who can influence the random number generator, and they can get a probability or a z-score of, like, let's say 3, right? A really good job.
Right.
So then you're like, okay, well, let's bring in 2 people, and maybe if 2 people are doing it, we'll get a z-score of 6.
Right.
Or, of some higher amount. Right? And you do that, and it turns out that, nope.
Right.
But sometimes you can bring in a small group of people, and if all the stars align, meaning that whatever it is psychologically is congruent with that group, that they feel like, if they all feel like they're really on the same wavelength and that there's power in that particular group, maybe if they're really close, or if they did some sort of ritual that makes them, kind of puts them in a slightly altered state of consciousness, then it's probably true that altogether they will get a stronger effect. But that's not because of the numbers. That's because that there's something about the group that prepared each individual consciousness to accept a higher outcome, a stronger effect. Okay, so you can maintain that in groups of 4, 10, 20, maybe like a really good speaker like Tony Robbins can get that. Like, they can get like 1,000 people to be in a really meaningful, receptive, energetic state to do it. Okay. But 100,000 people without a Tony Robbins who's going to catalyze them, I don't see it. Now, there's going to be, in that group, there's going to be a number of people who are going to take power from that, right? And to the extent that there's an effect, it's disproportionately the few people that are empowered by that are going to produce the result. So, and there's these ideas that it's like the square of the population. If they all meditate, then okay, maybe. We don't know, but I'm a little bit skeptical on that side. It's hard to create a single kind of meaningfulness among a larger and larger group of people, and it's that meaningfulness that really creates the anomalies, creates the significant effects.
And you said you haven't been able to demonstrate it even in the lab, but I agree. So, for example, like if you have a group of people trying to focus on a hurricane that's going to hit Florida or something, so a bunch of people focus on it. But what I find, because I work with groups all the time, what I find is that even though the intention is please don't hit Florida, please don't hit Florida, but the way you go about it, and going back to the subconscious mind, all these people are coming to the experiment, to the experience with their subconscious mind. So some people are saying, is this going to have an effect? I'm not sure if this is going to have it. And how does this work? So you are bringing all these other components, every single person that is taking part of this. It's just so extremely hard to come to a level of coherence within a group,
Exactly.
even though your final intention is the same. And so when I work with a group and I can see like the different like thought patterns, and it's like, this will never work because, like these people. And so what ends up happening sometimes is that sometimes it would work, but not exactly. So for example, it would like maybe avoid Florida, but then it would go hit South Carolina like in a huge way. So was that helpful? I don't know. You know what I mean?
Depends on where you live.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's what I mean. So it's like, we think it's easy to have, two people kind of become coherent on a consciousness level and send out that. It is so not the case because of our different, that's what I feel. And so that's the problem, to really get more than one person, let alone a whole group of people, to be coherent in the intent is one thing, but the way and all of that, I think is extremely difficult. But also, you and I talked about that. I think this last time we met, about the type of consciousness, like Tony Robbins is a human, and he's using, psychological tools, to influence a group of people or think something like that. But, I think that this is my personal theory and understanding and experience, that there are certain types of consciousness that come into the human framework, and have a different configuration. So when they send out their consciousness into the world, like I want peace or I want whatever, their consciousness mass can affect 7 billion people. That is who I believe the types that we call the Christ, and nothing to do with religion. So chill out, guys. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a type of consciousness that can do certain things more than a typical human can do, because the way their consciousness is configured. Even if we're talking about simple geometry, like, like the tetrahedron fits within the hexagon, it's like, it's a larger configuration that encompasses or contains, the collective. And I feel anyway, that's like my 2 cents.
You're right. I mean, there's superstars in this stuff in PK. Yeah. Everybody seems to be able to do it to an extent. But there are some people that are real. They're the real superstars. Yeah, this is quite clear in the literature. I mean, every country that's had a program to identify talent in this area has figured out that they have to identify individuals. It's not so much a training program. It's like it's finding people that are naturally gifted. And I met last week a Tibetan Lama who left the caves to come to California to do a meditation to bring rain to the state to put out the wildfires.
Okay. And
he was not trying to get 10,000 people all to meditate together with him.
Yeah.
It was no, he's got his own perspective of what he has to do, and it would be more effective for him just to come here and do it, which is a pretty wild perspective, but God bless him.
Yeah, do your thing. Speaking of non-locality, he could have done it from his cave in the Himalayas, but but it's all good. No, but it doesn't matter if that's what he thinks. The way his consciousness is going to be the most efficient and effective, then so be it.
Well, so I asked him about that. I was like, "Well, couldn't you just do this from the cave?" And he's like, "I wanted a vacation."
Oh, see, that's what I was saying. There's something else involved. Okay, somebody's asking, to Caroline, how can I be helpful to distribute your amazing movie documentary? Oh, well, yeah, please Yeah, I mean, that's sorry. I thought it was a question on, I mean, feel free to, share it with your friends on your blogs, and also like go to Amazon, put a positive comment, because new people who come to Amazon find the movie, they'll be inspired if you're saying something intelligent, that's helpful that way. Anything that you can do. I feel like this is an important movie, but it's not really my movie. I mean, it's my movie, but it's about consciousness. It's about humanity, where we should be going. So I feel like that's the reason why I'm so passionate about trying to put it out there. And I'm asking for as many people as possible to help in the process, because I really think this is, we brought some very important perspective and demonstrations in the film. So I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, so moving on to a question that's more relevant to here. There's a push to centralize control in the United States, and thus the control of freedom of information. We're just now arriving at a point like, which of the Library of Alexandria is, okay, I'm not sure how this is relevant. I'm gonna, so Roger, please be more specific as to what we're talking about here, so we can answer your question. But anyway, you're incredible. I love your work. I love what you're doing. I love your focus. Is there something you'd like to share about what you're working on, or whatever else you would like to share? And well, actually, just real quick before that, if you don't mind, because this is helpful, like for people who are listening, like how can we use this, everything that we've been talking about, you and I, and with your experience, in the lab, seeing people trying to influence this, influence that, we address the collective consciousness, but in practical terms. So we're dealing with this COVID or whatever. I don't even like to say the name because it's an energy, but it's kind of a weird, crazy situation. I mean, what do you think from your perspective can be done, on an individual basis or as a group, for an immediate kind of shifting of reality?
I think that the most important thing that we can do for the planet, whatever problematic situation it's dealing with at the moment, is to try to wake up to our true nature bit by bit, right? And fortunately for us, there's been people who have come before us who have given us really good instruction manuals for going inside and for improving and refining our own mind, our own consciousness, right? Okay, so there's meditation teachers, there's meditation texts. I really think that probably the next step for people to take is simply to meditate. If you're inspired by the work in the documentary Superhuman, and you want to somehow harness this incredible ability that exists inside of you, access to information and these types of things, the best way to do it, I think, is to begin with meditation. If it's true that our consciousness is affecting the physical world, and not just in small subatomic ways, but perhaps also in ways that accumulate to situations and opportunities in our own lives, it's our career, our relationships, whatever it is, then we need to become aware of the deeper sides of our minds and emotions that could be influencing the world to create those types of situations that we either want or don't want, right? So a really cool thing happens when you start to meditate is you become aware of consciousness in yourself that is not the mind and not your emotions, but it's something that's witnessing both of those things. And once you start to witness your mind and your thoughts and witness your emotions, you can start to make sense of them. You can start to have them not control your life. And if you go even deeper, you start to realize that this conditioning of pure consciousness and emotions are actually probably at the root of a lot of stuff that you don't want in your life. Maybe at the root of some things that you do. But by maintaining awareness of these things, that's where I think the real transformation begins. And I mean, that's typically what I leave people with in these conversations is no amount of further publications and research and whatever is going to turn on the light bulb for you. It's supposed to guide you into a direct personal experience of the subject matter, right? And the direct personal experience is going to come from turning within.
So well said. Perfect. But so kind of an extension on that, do you think that when people look inside of themselves and tap into their consciousness and empower themselves with that, do you think even with the madness of the outside world, do you think you can still create your outcome, your results, your reality within this larger chaos that other people are creating?
Sure, I do. One thing I think you start to realize is that you've assumed that you are perhaps more subject to those outside influences than you actually are.
Exactly.
You can move through the world with some degree of effortlessness, but you've got to shift your perspective to be there.
I love it. Awesome. Adam, this has been incredible. Is there something like, would you like to share, for example, your work, your website, or something where people can, if they want to know more about you, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. You can Google Consciousness app or Google Entangled or go to entangled.org and you'll find my stuff there. I'm not so active on social media, but I am working on a couple of projects that I'm going to be releasing soon.
Cool. Do you want to
follow
it? Or you can't say anything yet? Do you want to give us a teaser? Or
yeah, on one of them, I've for the past 5 or 6 years been kind of tinkering on a random number generator driven mobile app. And so you download the app and it turns your phone into a physical random number generator. It basically converts the accelerometer that's measuring small, like subtle perturbations into a random. And what we're seeing is that there is a consciousness effect that shows up for each individual. So if you have tons of people, basically, then you can do consciousness research in a totally different way. It's not bringing 1 or 2 people into a lab to demonstrate the effect, but you're sort of looking at the subconscious influence on the random number generator in the phone across hundreds of thousands of people. So, for example, about a year ago, we did a beta test with the beta version of the app for earthquake prediction. And this is a test that people with the app could opt into. And they said, okay, I'm going to lend my subconscious mind to influencing the phone in a way that's going to tell us when we think an earthquake is going to happen of a defined magnitude and distance. So you remember there was a huge earthquake in California about a year ago.
Right.
And we pulled the data and we found that there was a significant spike among all the data from the phones put together that seemed to, I won't say predict, but it was correlated to just before the earthquake actually happened. So what we could be looking at with this app is something strange and kind of wonderful, which is the ability to, like a supercomputer, when you have you have a network of supercomputers that are crunching these problems. That's one way of getting answers to things, but maybe another way is to tap into the subconscious minds of willing participants to answer questions that have some value to society, using not like not extreme processing power, but the innate knowledge and wisdom that comes from the consciousness being connected to sort of to all things, if you will.
The network.
Right.
Yeah. So, but does that mean like I just have to intend from my phone to predict that earthquake once and that's it? It knows?
When you download the app, it's not out yet, but we're still working on beta stuff. But the way it works is you download the app and then you'd see a list of experiments that are ongoing experiments constantly running. And if one appeals to you, you can opt in. And so opting in is setting their intention that your subconscious mind is going to influence the bits in that experiment in just the right way at just the right time to tell you something, in this case, that the earthquake is coming or whatever.
But what is the time frame? Like, so I look at the, I want the earthquake thing. I opt in today. Like, but what is like within what window?
Well, it's arbitrary. So, you know, because it's a consciousness effect, you can set it to whatever you want. But in this case, we were able to predefine the parameters of the experiment so that it was 24 hours before an earthquake of magnitude 6 or higher.
I'm sorry, what is the parameter? Within how?
24 hours before
okay.
an earthquake of a magnitude 6 or higher and within 100 kilometers of the epicenter.
Wow. That's incredible. That's what I love about this. It's like, you know, we have all this technology that's just like technology, but we are using the technology of consciousness, you know? It's just incredible. It's like, which is the way life works, you know? That's why I have so much hope for this. When do you think, like, where are you at with that project? This is incredible.
Well, it was supposed to be released about 4 years ago. It's been, at some point, I'm going to do a long, like 3-hour podcast just to tell the unbelievably ridiculous story of trying to get this app created and off the ground. It's been quite a journey. But I probably see it coming out in 2021. I think that we've got the final version. It's a lot better than I ever expected it to be, and the early results are a lot more interesting. And you're right, it's the point of all of this app project, and I guess my work in consciousness, my tinkering in consciousness research writ large, is exploring the boundaries of consciousness and technology. I kind of think that the physical world is itself a technology of consciousness. It's an arrangement of consciousness to allow consciousness to do its thing in this realm. So you can see maybe biological systems are technologies of consciousness as well. The brain, perhaps, too. So the phone, I think, is certainly conscious minds built it. But if you could build it, if you build physical electric technology in the way that we're accustomed to, in a way that allows that consciousness to sort of involve itself in it, I think you might be looking at a new paradigm of physical electronics and computing as we know it. Maybe one that can get away from having to basically spy on its users.
Yeah, right.
And steal all of their data in order to be predictive and know what the user wants. But instead, you could do away with that and just have consciousness sort of tell it what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not something that humans can store and manipulate.
I love it. And so actually I say that in the movie, I don't know if you remember, after we demonstrate this and this and that, and I say, if my consciousness can influence an electrical device, electronic device, a piece of paper, my consciousness can direct my brain to see without my physical eyes, if my consciousness is doing this, then to me, consciousness is the most powerful technology in the universe. And so I remember saying that, and then so we were, I mean, I wrote the show anyway, but but I remember the reaction of my DP and like everybody, my editors, like, but why do you say technology? I said, because it is. It is. I mean, it's not technology like we think of it in physical sense, but it is. It is technology. There is mechanism, and at the end of the day, if we start thinking about it in that way, then we don't have to separate ourselves from, okay, here's consciousness is all like woo, like spiritual stuff, like abstract stuff, and here's like real technology, like machines and devices and like boxes and stuff and cables. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
And that technology, the pure technology of consciousness, actually integrates with, or actually can master the physical part. So anyway, do you remember I said that line in the movie? So
I do remember that. Yeah, and I think you're spot on. From that point of view, all of the technological development, here in Silicon Valley that's happened is just iterating on a narrow conception of what tech actually is, right? But what we're talking about here is really expanding the understanding of technology, not from a human creating level, but from a consciousness influencing physical reality level. It starts to look very different, both in what it is and how it works. I think that's the future.
I was going to say, to me, that is the ultimate, moving to the new paradigm.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's the ultimate, because enough already of this separation. And so what you're doing is demonstrating exactly that.
Trying to.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll get there. But it's like, you're using technology, like human technology, but it's the consciousness that is just using this vehicle to demonstrate this or that. And so it's exactly what you're doing. I'm just so thrilled. You see, I mean, you guys, you can tell how excited I am, because, so very few people, well, a lot of people get it. Like, a lot of people believe, a lot of people talk about it. But what makes you different is that you're doing something with it. You're doing something about it. And that's why it is so necessary. I mean, like, we need people like you, to bridge that gap and take that whole understanding to the new paradigm, So I'm just so grateful.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So, all right, my dear. So, you guys, entangled.org, right? And I'm sure as Adam gets closer to finalizing his projects and more things, I would love to talk to him some more. And I so appreciate your time, Adam. I so appreciate your work. And I just hopefully we'll stay in touch. We'll talk some more. I have a few ideas for you. What else can be done? But I'm just very, very grateful. So thank you for your time. And I'll talk.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
All right, cool. So so you guys, you heard this person that, I mean, you saw the genius behind his brain, that his consciousness, what am I saying, his brain, it's his consciousness. I hope you enjoyed this. And please, as I said, we're broadcasting on several Facebook pages and everywhere. There's many, many, many people watching, I know, from all over the world. And so if you could just leave your comments, your questions for me, or especially for Adam, and we will respond to you, because we know where we're broadcasting, and we will go to all these pages and respond to you. We want to hear your comments. We want to hear your questions. And please, if you haven't done so, subscribe. Obviously, it's free. It's coming free to you. If you haven't watched the movie, watch it, superhumanfilm.com. I hope you've enjoyed this interaction. I certainly did. I love to have conversations at that level of intelligence. To me, this is real intelligence. This is the type of, and it had nothing to do with IQ, whatever, education, this and that. This is the type of intelligence that is leading, humanity in its evolution. So I really, really enjoy doing this. So I hope you will join me again next time. I'm looking forward to it. Everybody take care. You know what to do. Meditate, focus on you. It's all about you. You are not a victim. You are in charge of you. You are in charge of your experience and your reality. So have a great time doing it. And I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much.